They brought him up into the light because the boy wanted a spectacle. Eddard Stark blinked against the white blaze of sun and stone as the cart trundled to a halt at the foot of Baelor's steps. Heat lay on the great square, a shivering veil that made the world ripple. He could taste it, dust and incense and the copper smear of blood tucked beneath the scents like a secret. Chains rasped when he stood. The irons had rubbed his wrists raw in the black cells. They stung now when the breeze found them, a salt sting from sweat and old scabs. The city had come to see a head roll. Faces pressed along the stone balustrades of the square and crowded every step and gallery of the September fishwives with red folds of sun on their throats. Goldsmiths' apprentices with soft hands and hungry eyes. Gutter boys with their hair bleached to straw by the summer. The thin and the fat and the pious and the cruel and all the thousand souls that made a city's heart. The sound they made together was a restless sea. It moved forward and back as one, splashing against the foot of the steps, hissing when the gold cloaks prodded, sighing when a breeze carried the bell's clamor. "Lord Stark," Janos Slynt said in a voice oiled with importance. The Lord Commander's helm sat like a small crown upon his round head, and sweat calcified the fringe of hair that clung to his brow. "On your feet." Eddard had never thought to die here. The steps were too bright for death. The city too wide, too loud, too full of life. Death belonged to the slow hush of winter fields, to bare trees and gray skies and the crackle of a hearth. His mind, faithless as a hound, slipped toward those images as he stood. Toward a snowfall as fine as sifted flour, toward the sound of Arya shouting with cold stiff fingers around a wooden sword, toward Robb's voice just beginning to deepen with the iron of manhood. He saw Sansa in her pale gown among the royal retinue. He saw the way she stood lithesome and taut as a drawn string, her hands clenched, her mouth forming small prayers he could not hear. And above her, on the platform where the steps broke like a wave against the September's western doors, sat the boy on his wooden throne, with sunlight gilding every unruly curl of his pale hair. Joffrey loved to be high. He loved it as a hawk does, and for the same reason, to look down on prey. Cersei sat beside him, cream linen and a collar of emeralds. Her beauty had the sheen of a blade oiled and polished. It drew the eye and warned the hand. Ser Island Payne stood near, as expressionless as a ruin, his great sword at ease and his mouth a scar. The hound lounged like a chained shadow behind and to the right. The heat put a sheen on his burned flesh that made the ruin gleam. Varys was there as well, soft hands hidden in soft sleeves, eyes fixed on something invisible. Eddard thought of the last time the spider had visited the cell, the way the torchlight had made the fat man's face dance between pity and calculation. "For the realm," Varys had said then in that voice like poured wine. "You will say certain words, my lord. You will save your daughter. Perhaps you will save your son." "I have many sons," Eddard had answered, and even in the dark he had seen the flicker of regret. "Not so many as that," Varys had said gently, "and not where it matters." Now the square quieted in a slow collapse, as if some invisible thing pressed the air out of the city's lungs. The boy king rose. He had a narrow chin and a mouth made for command but not for mercy. Eddard watched it shape words. "Lord Eddard Stark," Joffrey Baratheon proclaimed, tasting each syllable as if it were a sweetmeat. "You have confessed to treason. You have bent the knee and admitted that you forged the words of a king and sought to usurp the throne that is mine by rights." The crowd hissed like a flock of geese disturbed. Eddard felt the trickle of sweat run down his spine and tried, reflexive, absurd, to move his shoulders as he would to ease a mail hauberk on a long march. He had not worn mail for weeks. He had not been a lord in all that time. Some things lived in the bones. "I showed mercy," the boy continued, "when such treason deserves only steel. But I am a good king. I am a just king. I will show mercy again." He turned, and the sunlight caught in his eyes. "Mother!" Cersei tilted her head, and something like surprise moved across her face. It was gone as quickly as a bird's shadow crossing a field. She rose, and when she spoke her voice carried in a way that did not belong to a woman or a man but only to authority. "The crown must show strength," she said. "But strength wears many faces. Lord Eddard Stark has confessed. He will be spared the sword. He will be shown the grace of taking the black. He is henceforth stripped of all titles and lands and rights in the south. He shall be escorted to the wall and placed in the care of Lord Commander Mormont. He will there serve out the remainder of his days, as a brother of the Night's Watch, beyond the ambitions of courts or the reach of politics, as is fitting for a man whose honor failed him. A wave broke in the square without warning. Screams, cheers, moans, prayers. Sansa's hands leapt to her mouth with such force that Eddard feared she'd bite through her own fingers. The hound shifted, boots scraping stone, and even Ser Island's blade seemed to stir in relief like some metal thing allowed to rest. And one more thing, the boy added, as if he were choosing a second cake after the first had not sated him. As surety against any treachery from the wolves of the north, the crown holds my lord Robb Stark, called the young wolf, as guest and hostage. His good behavior will ensure his father's safe conduct. Eddard swayed. For an instant the light turned to spears and the square blurred until it was only colors and heat. Robb in chains. He had pictured the boy, no, the man, for he had seen that too in his mind, the stiffness at the jaw and the set to the shoulders, gathering banners beneath the long gold of the northern sun, calling spears to stand for their lord. He had not seen him here, under the shadow of the September, trapped by the smiling malice of a child. He fixed his eyes on Sansa to steady himself. She nodded, nod upon nod, fast as a bird. He understood her then with a clarity that cut. She has bartered me for him, he thought, and the thought brought no shame and no anger. He had bartered, too, all his life, for winter oats, for a blacksmith's last years, for a holdfast guard's extra pay. There was always a trade in living. A father kept a ledger in his heart. He squared this one with a breath. The gold cloaks took him back down from the blaze. In motion the day lost its edges. The sun spread and the stones breathed and the city's press stank and shone. The cart jolted and swayed and set every bruise to talking and his chains to little iron songs. They took him past the street of flour where naked children rolled in pale dust beside torn sacks. They took him past the hook where rotting fish turned the air to meat. They took him along the street of sisters where the mad carved saints out of old beams and ivied walls leaned as if whispering secrets to each other across the narrow lanes. They returned him to the dark. The black cells swallowed sound and sight until there was only the memory of both. In the chalky space that remained inside his skull, he saw Winterfell's great tower rising against a lavender dusk, and the broken tower where he had found Jon a boy, quiet as midnight, watching the wind move through the weirwood's leaves as if it were letters he could learn. "Robb," he said aloud to the dark, and the word came back to him thinner than he had sent it. He slept like a man fallen into a well, slammed down, tumbled, limbs striking stone. He woke when keys rattled and boots shuffled. The torch burned a smoky hole in the black. "Up," Yoren said from within the smoke. His voice had the grit of a road in it, not the oil of a court. "Time to go, Lord Stark." "Yoren," Eddard whispered, and found that his throat did not like the shape of the name. It was a name out of the old life, out of stables and the clatter of hooves in the yard and a rough voice taking a boy with a sword that was mostly will. "Arya, gone," Yoren said. "Gone and safe, God's willing. Best you not put words on it." He spat neatly to one side. "We ride with a score of gold cloaks. Janos Bloody Slint wants to see you at the wall as much as anyone. But I've my own lads as well. Some from Flea Bottom. Some as never seen a tree that ain't a gallows." Eddard stood, bones creaking. "Robb," he said again, unable to keep that word from his mouth, as if saying it would make it more true. "The king." "Aye." Yoren's mouth twisted in a thing that wasn't a smile. "They've the wolf pup. Took him at the Green Fork, so the whisper goes. Lord Tywin sent him south. The lion likes his trophies on the wall. We'll ride under good eyes." Eddard leaned a palm against damp stone. The coolness surprised him, like a kindness. "How?" "Horses stumble. Scouts lie. The gods tilt a hand. We'll hear the longer tale up the King's Road in some muddy alehouse with sour bread. Yoren lifted the torch to look at him as a man might look at a horse he'd been tasked to lead 100 leagues. The scrutiny was frank. "You'll keep your head down and your mouth shut, Lord Stark." "A lesson I should have learned sooner," Eddard said. He let the chain take his weight and then straightened from it. "Do they let a man say goodbye?" Yoren's eyes flicked, softening. "You said it on them steps, I reckon." "Come. The road waits." They dressed him. No silks, no wool of the north. A rough-spun shirt and breeches with the feel of a sackcloth. Boots that had not belonged to him. A cloak that smelled faintly of mildew and wood smoke. The weight of chains remained, a reminder that the mercy given him had iron teeth. Yoren's men placed black around his shoulders, and it felt like a jest. They led him through corridors that twisted like a worm in the red stone. The keep had always felt too warm to him, even in the cool of morning, and now the torch heat set his skin to burning. They came up through a postern door where light stabbed clean. Eddard blinked once, twice, felt tears rise into his eyes and let them be. It was only light. The yard beyond the iron gate was a constant traffic of carts and men and animals. The smell of dung and hay and horses was as honest as anything he had known in weeks, and he nearly smiled for it. A man struggling with a barrel swore in a Stormlands drawl. A boy chased a chicken. A dog lay on its side and panted with its tongue lolling like a bit of red satin. Life scuffed and cursed and rolled on. A knot of gold cloaks gathered around the gate itself. Ser Mandon Moore stood among them, expressionless as a winter pool. "Lord Stark," he said, "we ride at a slow pace. If you attempt flight, you will be cut down. If you attempt to address the crowd, you will be gagged. If you attempt—" "I understand," Eddard said. He felt suddenly very tired. "I have no attempts left in me." They set out before first light the next morning, at an hour when the city was most peaceable, when the last drunks had fallen and the first baker was coaxing warmth from his ovens. The sky bloomed with pink in the east like a wound healing. The King's Road unscrolled ahead, the great spine of rutted earth that pointed north as straight and sure as a blade. Eddard rode on a plain gelding that flicked flies from its sides with a tail the color of dirty cream. Yoren swayed in the saddle at his side, and behind them walked a ragged train of boys and men marked by the watch's black. Some looked too young. Some looked as old as Eddard felt. One boy kept touching his hair as if to check that it was still there, as though some which might have taken it in the night. Another marched with his jaw set and his lips cracked and bloody. He had the look of a smith's apprentice, thick wrists and the outline of strength already built in layers beneath poor food. "You bring recruits to King's Landing?" Eddard asked Yoren when the sun had fully freed itself and found their backs. The rain of light on his shoulders felt like a benediction he did not deserve. "I bring them from King's Landing," Yoren grunted. He jerked his chin at the boys. "There's always a crop. Flea Bottom yerks them out like a sow. Some I throw back, some we keep. That one." He indicated the smith-limbed boy with a roll of his shoulder. "Would be a fight if he had meat on him. This other, with the ears like sails, he'll run at first snow and die of it." Yoren squinted at the column of gold cloaks ahead and the dust they raised. "And then there's you. The watch'll set a place, never doubt. Lord Commander always short a few brains, and you've more than most." "More mistakes," Eddard said. "Brains make mistakes quicker," Yoren said, and he spat and wiped his mouth with the back of a hand, as if he just removed some lingering taste of court from his tongue. They stopped at midday where the road widened to a scrubby verge and a stand of trees offered a ragged gift of shade. The boys fell on bread as if it were the first food they had ever known. Eddard chewed slowly. The bread was as dry as old vows. A fly settled on his knuckles and he shook it off. He found his eyes pulled north without meaning to call them there. There was a way the sky looked that direction, paler as if the light itself had thinned. It was simple to believe that the world narrowed into winter somewhere just beyond the horizon. The second day, rain came on them as they passed a huddle of low houses with roofs of reeds and walls of wattle and daub patched until they were more mud than anything. The rain was warm, a southern rain that painted the road into slick clay and plastered the boys' hair to their skulls. The gold cloaks cursed and tugged at their cloaks as if they were not made for weather. The men of the watch endured. Eddard bent his head and let the rain wash the city grit from his skin. They passed a grave under a hawthorn bush, marked by a rock. The hawthorn shook white blossoms onto the mud like a reversed snow. Yoren looked away when they went by, as a man might look away when he passes a tavern after he has sworn off ale. There were more graves after that. The Riverlands had been learning to speak the language of war. Fields left and tilled, orchards stripped, doors barred in day as well as night. The trees here had seen men die with their eyes wide. Once, on the fourth morning, a cart came up behind them with a rag sticking from its axle like a tiny flag. A woman leaned in it, her belly a mountain beneath a blanket. A boy of 5 or 6 walking beside with careful steps. New seriousness on his small face, as if he had been told to carry a precious thing and was determined to do it right. The man who pushed the cart had shoulders like 2 stones and a face like leather. He looked at the gold cloaks with a hatred so old and baked in that it had lost its heat. It was a habit now, not a flame. He did not look at Eddard at all. Eddard watched them until they were 3 bends behind and then out of sight. "Are we so hated?" he asked Yoren quietly. "Men hate what makes them powerless," Yoren said. "War makes everyone powerless, and someone's face must stand for it. And our faces will do," Eddard said, and the words had no sting. They were too true for sting. When they made camp that night, Yoren came and sat on his haunches beside Eddard with a strip of smoked fish in his hand and a look like a man about to tell a cripple that the road was longer than he thought. "You should know what you're riding to," he said. "Not only snow." "I know snow," Eddard said. It came out wrong, arrogant, and foolish, and he felt the heat of shame. "Forgive me. Snow's the easy bit," Yoren said. "You'll find your bastard there." The boys made himself a place. Eddard closed his eyes and saw Jon's face in the light of the Winterfell kitchens when the door slammed open and the knight leapt in with Dom Eric Bolton, half-dressed and laughing. That was how memory worked. It did not render the thing you asked for. It gave you the thing beside it. "What place?" Eddard asked, and he could not help the softness in his voice. "Under Lord Commander's eye," Yoren said. "Good as any brother. Not loved by all, no boy is, but held by some. The fat one, Samwell, that's a friend true as bread." "Bread is not always true," Eddard said, but he nodded. He found that he was breathing as if he had climbed a stair. Took effort to slow it. "And your lordship should know the wall has eyes turned south even now," Yoren continued. "We hear whispers, not only of burned holds and Lannister men settling scores. Letters in raven's claws, sealed and sent. Stannis Baratheon's hand to them. Words about bastards and beds and blood. Names as not all folk like to hear." "Ah," Eddard said, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a drop of rain caught on a thorn. "Words. They're weapons sharp as any arak when they come at the right time," Yoren said. "Southron's swords don't reach the wall, but words might." Eddard lay that night with his hands beneath his head and his eyes on the black above the branches. The stars were a frost pricked into the coat of the world. He tried to think of nothing. That was the secret. That was the counsel he gave to green boys on their first patrol, when the fear had their fingertips shaking and their teeth chattering even when no cold brushed them. That to hold yourself still, to make your mind a pond and let the wind go over it without catching. But the mind was a poor pond tonight, tossed at every breath. Robb appeared and was gone, and Catelyn's hands rose to pull a shawl tighter, and Bran smiled up from the rushes beneath the high table with a sliver of roast fowl fat on his chin. Arya sprinted past with a cat in her arms and its claws making ladders down her arms and not caring. Rickon, he forced himself not to imagine Rickon's face. It was a kindness too thin to bear weight. Sansa, he had seen her on the steps, pale as a candle. There had been something in her eyes that had not been there before. A shard. He would have to carry the knowledge that he had placed it there. A father's ledger was a cruel book. The boy king's voice would not leave his ear. Guest and hostage. The words had centuries in them. Men had traded their own bodies for surety since the first hall was raised. It was wise. It was cruel. The two often supped at the same table. In the Red Keep, under a sky that thickened to purple and then black beyond the tower's silhouettes. Robb Stark stood at the window of a narrow chamber and stared out between bars too close for even his hand. The iron was cool under his palm. If he closed his eyes and simply felt it, he could pretend it was the iron of a sword with Winterfell's smith stamp on the tang, cooled after quenching, ready to take its edge. But the bars were rounded for a hand's comfort and cast in a fan at the top to please a king's eye. They had no edge and no purpose but his frustration. He had not been brought through the city to jeers. The Lannisters were not fools. They had smuggled him by night under a pile of wool sacks past sleeping gates, and his eyes had groped at darkness like a blind man's. He had smelled the river long before he saw the city's lights stain the tide, and there had been the stink of tanneries and of too many men too close together and the sweet rot of 1,000 hearth buckets of offal thrown into alleys. He had counted steps when they brought him within. He had counted even now. It gave the mind a thing to chew. Gri. Igwind. He swallowed hard because the word put a hot stone in his throat that threatened to break him open. They had taken the direwolf from him at Tywin's camp with 12 men and a net, and the fact that it had taken that much should have been consolation and was not. He had heard Grey Wind bay with a sound that turned grown soldiers pale and watched men leave the tent to piss because they would not do it in their breeches. Then he had been led away, and the sound had dropped behind him like a door closing. Once, in the night of the march, a howl had reached him across a mile of dark and made his arms prickle. It had not come again. He could not know if the wolf lived. He would not pretend ignorance was comfort. The door scraped. He turned expecting guards, and Sansa stood in the seam of light like a candle wick. Behind her, one of the hound's mongrel-faced men waited. "Robb," she whispered, and the word trembled. She stepped inside quickly, as if to be in the room made her safer. The guard did not follow. He leaned on the jamb and looked away with a boredom that had been trained into him like a dog brought to heel. Perhaps he knew shame. Perhaps he simply knew there was better fun down the hall. "Sansa," Robb said. He had tried to imagine this meeting so many ways on the road, and his mind had offered him only battles and rescues, daring leaps from balconies, swords snatched from fools who underestimated him. What he could not conjure on those long, bumpy nights had been the simplest thing. The sight of his sister, safe, and all he could do in the face of it was say her name and feel his thoughts flow out of him like an open skin letting blood. "I came when I heard," she said. "They told me only an hour ago what the king had, what Joffrey had said, that father is to be sent to the wall, that you are to be kept here as an honored." She couldn't finish the word. "I went to the queen. She said I might see you if I promised to be brief and to bring no letters. I have nothing written. I have only myself, Robb. Oh gods, it is good to see you." She crossed the little space and wrapped her arms around him carefully, as if he were made of something that might split. He felt the bones in her back through the fine cloth of her gown. Court had worked her thin. He held her a moment and thought that if he put his head in the juncture of her shoulder and neck and breathed, he might smell the hills around Winterfell in her hair. But there was only rose oil and the faintest salt of recent tears. "I saw father," she said into his shoulder, muffled. "On the steps. He lives. He lives. I prayed, and he lives." "He lives," Robb said. His own voice sounded older to his ears than he felt. "And he goes to the wall." He could not keep the bitterness from the last word even if he had wanted to. Sansa stiffened slightly, not in offense but in the reflex of a girl who has learned the precise lines she must walk. "Better than the other," she said. "Better than the sword." "Yes," Robb said, and he did not add that perhaps it would have been a cleaner thing for a Stark to die before a September than to be buried in black and spend his old years freezing his guts to ice at a wall of old snow while crows pecked at his conscience. He did not say it because it was a terrible thought and because it would break Sansa. He had learned in these weeks something of how to choose the right truths to say aloud and which to keep folded inside like letters in a lady's pocket. "Joffrey says I am to be a guest," he said instead, smiling thinly. "A guest in a tower with an iron lattice and a guard and meals sent on a tray. I am to write to Mother and tell her to counsel the lords to patience, and that all will be well if they put down their swords." Will you write? Sansa asked, searching his face for a promise she could carry back to a queen who kept lists and counted favors as small coins. Yes, Robb said, and I will tell her truth besides the words they would like. That the Lannisters hold the board, and that if I play cleverly I may turn even their own pieces against them. You sound like Maester Luwin, Sansa said, blinking as if the memory itself were dust in her eyes. Do you remember the lesson of the foxes where— I remember, Robb said softly. The room held them both, and Winterfell's schoolroom, and a field of snow where the prince of foxes braided and spun into illusions even a hunter could not follow. Sansa took his hand and squeezed it. Be careful, she said. He is cruel and he is vain and he thinks that makes him a god. But he is only a boy and it makes him a fool, and fools are most dangerous when they wear crowns. Mother taught you that? Robb asked, surprised into the shape of a smile that had something like their childhood in it. Sansa's mouth opened and shut, and in that small motion Eddard Stark's daughter seemed to become Catelyn Tully's daughter in the turn of a breath. No, she said. Queen Cersei did. In the mornings, Cersei Lannister broke her fast with bread that had the honey of the upper mander soaked into it and olives wrinkled as old secrets. She ate with care, neat and controlled, and never looked down at the plate when she lifted the cup to her lips. Littlefinger had remarked on it once. In that way he had that sounded like an anecdote but was in fact a knife slid gently under the armor. Cersei had smiled and had had one of his informers flayed that same day for reasons that would never be spoken aloud, but would be understood by any man with two wits to rub together in King's Landing. Your kindness today has the city humming, Peter Baelish said now, standing in the loggia where the morning thickened into heat. He stood with one hand on the stone and one on his purse, as if he might tip the world if required and pay the bill for it from his own pouch. Mercy sets tongues wagging more than blood, at least for a few days. Then they demand more blood than ever. People are strange vessels. You must keep filling them or they crack. Cersei dipped bread in honey. They will not crack. Not now, Littlefinger allowed. Not with Tywin marching and Stannis writing letters that many men cannot read. You have seen a letter? I have seen the wax and the faces of men who read them, he said lightly. It is enough. The realm hangs together now with thread and fear. The boy sits straighter in his chair when he thinks he has done a kingly thing. It pleases the crowd to be pleased. Cersei turned her head very slowly, the way a cat turns when something moves in a patch of sunlight. I did not do this to please a crowd, she said. No. Littlefinger's tone implied a harmless game between children, tossing a ball. To please whom, then? My father, she said. She let the words stand. He has sent me a gift, and I have hung it where all may see. The north will not rise while their heir is fed and clothed and allowed his prayers. They will mutter, some will sharpen knives, but banners do not fly for whispers. Meanwhile the Wolf Lord goes to the end of the world. He will not speak again in any hall that matters. If Stannis sends 1,000 letters, they will be read by men who cannot raise 1,000 men. And if I must pinch the boy's ear and make him cry to remind him that mercy is a thing he dispenses, not a thing he owes, I will do that as well. You are wise, Littlefinger said. His eyes wandered toward the inner rooms where a young king stamped and raged and presented heads on plates to himself in his mind. And patient. Patience is the rarest coin in this city. Cersei broke bread again, methodical. I am neither, she said. I am merely older than he is. Tyrion will be coming. Littlefinger observed in that airy way that wrapped many purposes in one ribbon. Word reached 3 days past. The mountain clans escort him like fleas escort a dog, Joff says. He says that with admiration. Cersei allowed herself to imagine her brother's face when he arrived to find a city not yet burning, to find the wolf tamed and the stag so proud of his own antlers, he could not see the hunters. She felt the old ache in her teeth. Then let him come. King's Landing has a place for clever dwarfs. We put them where they can admire our elbows. Some elbows are very fine, Littlefinger said in that purr of his. He bowed. My queen. When he was gone, Cersei stood and went to the balustrade and looked down into the city. spread like a stain. She could not see the King's Road, but she knew the Stark was on it. She imagined him in black, pleased something simple in her. She had never much cared for simple things. Childhood had taught her that simple pleasures were traps. But sometimes she let herself have one. A crumb for the child that had been. It made her all the more ferocious in the hours that followed. In Castle Black, Jon Snow stood on the outer walkway while ravens tripped and squabbled on the rafters above, and the morning wind licked at his hair. The wall wore night even in afternoon, its blue and gray pressing down as if it had stolen sun and hidden it in its heart. The wind always smelled of ice and old water here, of stone and things that grew in darkness. His breath made steam before it. He watched a sliver of light chase itself along the distant trees and thought of hot bread. "Letters," PYP called. He came out onto the walkway with a board balanced on his hip and a handful of strings and seals. "Mormont says these for the armory. These 3 to be copied. This to be burned unread. This to be read aloud because he likes to hear my voice." "Your voice is a joke," Gren said behind him, shoving him with an affectionate brutality, like a rooster with a cold. "Jealousy speaks," PYP said. Sam came puffing after them with both arms wrapped around a basket of charcoal. He had a bit of ash on his nose. "There is one for you," he said to Jon, his face bright in that earnest way that made men who needed to be cruel feel clever for the taking. "From the south," he added unnecessarily, as if any letter would come from the far north where wildlings remembered how to speak words only to insult the men in black and to trade furs when the mood took them. Jon took the letter. His name was inked with care, as if the writer had paused over it and breathed on the page before moving to the next letter, as if to make sure each bit of his name did not fly away. He knew the handwriting. He stood very still. The wind went past and pulled at his cloak and could not move him. The world contracted around him and the edges of the wall grew thinner, as if the great ice were a piece of glass and he could see down into the trapped bubbles and the ancient leaves caught there. Sam, with that instinct of kindness that worked often as a sense, took the letters from PYP and the basket from himself and herded Gren back 2 steps as if clearing the space around Jon for a right. PYP deflected it with a joke about chickens and ravens that made Gren snort. It was a shield and a good one. Jon leant his back to the ice. The cold went through to his bones like a truth. He broke the seal. He lifted the page. "Jon, I had the letter in my hands for an hour before I put a word to it. I am in the red keep in a tower with a window that looks on a slit of river and the smell of the city comes up like cooking gone wrong. They call me guest. It is a word with feathers. It floats and drafts and settles where it will, and it means what the speaker would like it to mean and rarely what it ought. Father is to be sent to you." Jon stopped, his heart hitting against his ribs. The words seemed to blur and then come clear again, like stones seen through water when a wind passes over the surface. He read them again, and the ink did not change. "The King Joffrey spared him the sword and sent him to the wall. There is more to it than that. There is always more. You will hear the rest like a rumor half true. They will likely bring father under guard with some of the black among the gold. He will be in irons because they love the look of heavy things on men. You must know before any other. You must know that he lives. The price for this living is that I am to be kept here, a wolf cut from the pack with his claws clipped. I am fed like a knight and watched like a thief. It is not a humiliation I can afford to name. I name it to you and to no one else. Tell the Lord Commander what is needful. Tell him first that your father comes not as a lord but as a brother, and that he will bend his knee to the vows. He will do it. The rest I must keep for the day I see you or for parchment that does not pass through 10 hands before yours. Take care, brother. Robb." Jon held the page a moment longer and then lowered it and found that his hands had begun to shake at some point. He did not try to hide it. He did not think he could. "Something," PYP said softly, no longer joking. There was no question in it and no prying either. It was the offering of a lad with a good heart. "My father is coming to the wall," Jon said. Saying the words put them in the air, made them real in a way that ink could not. He looked out over the pale trees and felt a feeling rise in him that had teeth and wings and did not have a name he had ever used. It was joy. It was terror. It was a boy reaching toward a man and fearing what he would catch. Sam's eyes went wide. "Oh," he said, and then again, "Oh." And his hands fluttered at his chest like startled birds before he stilled them with a grab at the basket he no longer held. John, that is a thing," John said. It was all he could manage without his voice breaking. He breathed once, twice. The cold did its work. It always did. He took the letter to the Lord Commander. Mormont read it without the twitch of a muscle in his heavy face. He had a way of receiving news as if he had already lived it once before and lowered it into memory like a bucket into a well. "So," Mormont said finally, and his beard moved like a small beast settling itself. "A lord in black. The gods do love their jests. Did he confess?" "He did," John said, throat tight, and then added because it felt necessary. "At the September, before the city." Mormont's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not scorn. A movement like a man who has tasted something bitter and decided it will do for his medicine. "Then he's already learned the first lesson of the wall," he said. "The world behind you grows quiet when you take the vows, but not silent. He'll come here with noise in his head and 1,000 faces in his sleep. We'll knock the worst of it out of him with work." "Yes, my lord," John said. "You'll keep your knees under you," Mormont added with a shrewd look that came at John from under the bristle of eyebrow like an arrow from a thicket. "Don't go turning into a boy in the yard because you find a father where you expected only crows." John flushed. "No, my lord." Mormont drummed his fingers once on the table. He reached for a horn of ale, thought better, and reached for a quill instead. "We'll send a raven to Eastwatch. They can look south for your procession. I'll have Othel repair the old Stark place on the west side of the yard. It's been empty since before I took this chair. He'll not sleep there long. No one sleeps in their old names long here, but it may ease his bones." "Othel's already muttered it wants a roof," Chet grumbled from the shadows, because Chet existed to grumble and to bite at ankles when he did not dare bite at throats. He received Mormont's glance and subsided. John left the hall and stood under the shadow of the armory roof while snow began to sift in a lazy way that would not amount to much. The flakes melted on his cheeks like a secret. A picture formed on its own in his mind. His father walking beneath the wall, head bare to honor something only he knew. His mouth a straight line not because he feared but because he refused to pretend a thing he did not feel. He would reach out and then stop himself because he was a brother of the Watch now and not a lord from Winterfell. He would nod, perhaps. He would lay a hand on Jon's shoulder, perhaps, and his hand would be the weight of a vow. Back on the King's Road, Eddard Stark felt the land rise by slow degrees under his horse. The air changed the way air changes when a man climbs a tower, thinner, clearer, sharper in the nose as if the wind had been honed on a whetstone. The boys straggled and gathered. The gold cloaks grew more sullen with each mile. They did not like distance. They had the look of men who had believed the world ended at the city walls and now found themselves walking off the map into some sea that was only dirt and sky. Yoren carried on with the balance of a man who had been made for roads. On the 8th day, they found an inn-yard burned and empty. The sign had gone to ash and its chain melted into a twist that pointed at nothing. 2 dogs snuffled in the ruins. Their ribs were a map of hunger. The gold cloak stopped and looked and did not volunteer to eat char and cinders. Yoren went among the sheds with 2 of his lads and came back with 3 turnips and a length of rope. "War," he said succinctly. "Tywin's boys or some others. Maybe just men in no colors who forgot how to take bread anyway but with a blade." They bedded in a hollow that night, with the wind skimming the grass like a hand stroking a pelt against the grain. Eddard dreamed of the heart tree of Winterfell. In the dream, the white trunk was not wood but bone, and when he laid his palm against it, it was warm. He woke with the taste of iron on his tongue and did not know whether some insect had bit him, whether some memory had reopened in his sleep like a wound, whether the gods took their tithe. He learned the names of the boys because it seemed right to. Hot pie was not yet hot pie, but called himself by the name of his mother's second husband and did not look convinced by it. Lamy had a mouth on him. He used words as a boy uses stolen coins, extravagantly, to see what they will buy. The smith-limbed boy's name was Gendry, and he watched the world with a suspicion too old for his years. There was a gravity in him that made him seem like a stone one could tie a boat to. "You have the hands of a king's bastard," Eddard told him once without thinking. It came out of him like a cough. He was a good man and a bad king, and the shape of his hands did nothing for either. The boy snorted and went to gather wood. On a morning of thin sun, the trees thinned, and the king's road ran like a spine through a country of heather and rock and wind. Their breath smoked ahead of them. The world felt clean here, stripped of the sweet rot of the south, the thick perfumes of court. Yoren tipped his head back and grinned into the cold. "There," he said, jerking his chin at a line on the horizon that might have been a cloud if it did not refuse to move. "There's your end of the world, or its beginning." Eddard looked until his eyes watered, and in the distance the wall rose, unfurling from east to west, blue as old milk in the places where the light struck and black as deeper snow in shadow. It defied the sky. It denied it. It was so large that for a long moment it seemed to be coming toward them. He breathed out, and the cold took his breath as if in exchange, as if it were currency here with a rate of exchange worse than in any alley of King's Landing. He thought of Jon, and the thought was a stone cast into a pond that had been frozen and had not realized it. The crack moved outward softly, circle upon widening circle. He rode for a long time without speaking. The gold cloaks were less loud now. They had the sense of men approaching a church that was not theirs. At twilight, in the Red Keep, Sansa knelt on the floor of the sept the queen had consecrated after a fashion to appease one of her many hungers. The candles smelt of bees and were very yellow. She had not dared to write to anyone. She had prayed instead until her knees ached and the stone had made its ghostly pattern of cold on her skin. She had said the names of the seven one by one until they ran together like a lullaby, and then she had said her father's name and Robb's, and Arya's, though it hurt like biting metal. She had even said the name of the hound, and that had surprised her. She did not tell anyone. She asked the mother to make her tender and the warrior to make her brave. She asked the maiden to forgive her for how much she had learned. She asked the father to be gentle with her father's heart. She stood and wiped her eyes and smoothed her skirts and went to break bread with a queen who believed that mercy was a ribbon to tie around a whip. Sansa had learned the court's strangest lesson, that to stay kind one must wear a mask as carefully as any who meant harm, that to keep one's heart soft one must sometimes make the face hard. It was hard work. She was tired always now. She wanted her mother. She wanted summer's fur under her cheek. She ate with small bites and listened to men lie with grace and women tell truth with knives hidden in it, and kept her face an instrument she could play on command. Robb sat in his tower and counted the bolts that held his bed frame together. He had discovered that this was a thing that could steady a man in the small hours when the night pressed and the city murmured like a beast. He was not good at prayers. He had never been. He had liked the old gods because they required only that you sit quiet and let the wind speak. Here there was no wind. He made a god for himself out of counting and routine. Each bolt had a burr. He found them with his nail and scraped until smooth. Sometimes he thought of the burr as a man who had wronged him. Often the man had his own face. He wrote to his mother and told her to wait. He told her that waiting can be a tactic, not a defeat. He did not write that the waiting was killing him by slow inches, and he did not care how noble the word might sound in a hall. He asked for news of Bran and Rickon and received it, and the words were dry leaves in a basket, and he pressed them to his chest anyway to see if they might warm him. He dreamed of gray wind. In the dream the dire wolf lay at the foot of his bed, head on paws, eyes pale as river ice. The wolf breathed and the room filled with the smell of pine roots and blood. He woke with the feeling that the bed had been pushed across the floor by that breath. He lay there in the dark and whispered the old words of the North to himself because there was no one else to say them to. The procession to the wall made perhaps a day for every half-day it should have taken. The gold cloaks were careful. They were afraid. Eddard did not begrudge them that. Fear had become companion, like a second shadow. It had its uses. It kept a man from stepping where the ground had a mouth. The last miles were a study in proportion. The wall grew not by steps but by impossibilities. It should not be present in the eye at one and the same time as the ground at one's horse's hooves, and yet it was. It ruled the sky with the serene cruelty of mountains, but it was no mountain. It was a made thing, a decision of men or gods with no patience for arguments. Eddard found a strange ease in it. When a thing was fixed beyond appeal, the mind stopped scraping. They were met at the gate by men in black with spears that shone like thin mirrors and faces that had learned to keep their own counsel. A man with a black beard and a voice like gravel introduced himself as Bowen Marsh. His eyes slid over the gold cloaks as if they were stains on a good table. He did not hide his satisfaction when the gate shut behind the last of them with a finality that rang in Eddard's chest like a struck bell. "Lord Stark," he said, "if that is still your name." "It is my name," Eddard said. "Only the world around it has changed." Marsh made a noise that could have been approval. "Lord Commander waits," he said. "We have prepared quarters." They brought him across the yard where men moved like dark birds. Someone swung a hammer, and the sound rang in the cold air like a claim on the place. Jon stood from where he had been watching with a weight of intention in his spine that made him look taller than he was. He stepped forward, checked himself, then stepped anyway. Eddard felt his mouth find a shape. He did not know if it was a smile. It was certainly a wound. "Jon," he said. "Father," the boy said, and the word was a door through which winter and summer rushed together. They paused before one another with all the distance of years and names and vows pressed into the space between, and then they bridged it as men must, with small gestures that looked to outsiders like nothing and to those within like a continent moved. Eddard set his hand on Jon's shoulder in a grip that was more like a laying on of hands than an embrace. Jon's arm came up half a span as if drawn. They stood a breath and then another that way, while men went by with buckets and the world did not stop, and yet something had altered in it, as if some slight tilt of the earth had been corrected. "We have long road to speak," Eddard said finally, when his tongue could obey him. Jon nodded. "And walls to mend," he said, with a ghost of humor like sunlight discounted and yet warm upon the cheek if you turned to it. Mormont came then with his raven hopping and croaking and repeating "corn, corn," as if that was the truth inside every other. He took Eddard's measure with a king's eye that had not needed crown or court to learn its sum. "You come to me with irons," the old bear said. "Such ornaments don't suit our fashion. We'll take them off and put you to work. We mend things here. Sometimes we mend men." Eddard bowed his head. The man took his chains and turned them with steady hands and then passed them to Bowen Marsh. The irons bit once more at his skin before they lifted and were gone. He felt lighter. He felt older. "I am yours," he said. "You were never mine," Mormont replied, not unkindly. "You're the walls." The raven said, "Wall," and then, as if surprised by its own eloquence, "Corn." That night, Eddard slept in a cell that smelled of old wool and fresh straw and the particular cold of ice that has not been invited to melt. He lay awake longer than he slept and listened to the sounds of the castle. The hiss of the wind against the eaves, the distant clink of iron, a man's cough 2 rooms over, a laugh smothered as if ashamed of itself. He thought of Sansa's face and Robb's letter and Arya. He could not stop the thought of Arya. It came like a hair through a gap in a hedge at the edge of vision, quick and startling and gone, and of Catelyn with the weight of choices in her hands. He thought of Stannis and his letters, and of words flying like black birds over hills to nests where they would do their work. He rose in the dark before dawn and went out into the yard where the stars had not yet gone out and the world held its breath. Jon came to him with 2 wooden swords that had seen better days and worse mornings. "If you're to be one of us," Jon said lightly, "you'll need to remember our dances." "I am old," Eddard said. "You've always been older than I was," Jon said with a sudden crooked smile that was like finding a familiar knife in a new sheath. "It never stopped you then." "No," Eddard allowed, and he took the sword, felt good in his hand. The wood remembered what the body forgot. They moved among the ghosts of their old lessons. The cold slapped their cheeks and put roses on them no southern lady would have recognized. Jon's feet were quick. Eddard's eyes were steady. When the boy leapt, the man grounded him. When the man slowed, the boy drove him. They danced until they were breath-sore and their arms had become weights, until the dawn climbed the wall like a thief and all the small sounds of the castle woke. And then they stood leaning on their swords and grinning like boys and men both. "Again," Jon said. "Again," Eddard agreed. South, under a different dawn, Robb Stark sat on a stool in his tower room with his back straight and his hands folded over his knee. He had a small mirror polished to a brightness that troubled him. He rarely looked into it. Now he looked and forced himself not to turn away. He set his face as he meant it to be. He had discovered that a man could choose certain faces as he might choose a cloak. He could wear patience. He could wear courtesy as a weapon. He could let words land on him and not show where they struck. It was a kind of armor, and though it was not made in a smithy, it was iron. The door opened. Joffrey came in without knocking, as if rooms had never been made for anyone but him. 2 guards stood behind him and watched Robb with the intensity of men tracking a fox. The king wore a doublet the color of wheat, with lions prancing in a march around the hem, and he had a look on his face that people mistook for handsomeness because it came from cheekbones and light and not from anything inside. He made a little sound low in his throat when he saw Robb's composure, a sound like a boy kicking at a thing to see if it would break. "My guest," Joffrey said, tasting the word again. "I thought we might talk." Robb rose and inclined his head the exact degree required by a king. "Your Grace." "I am merciful," Joffrey said immediately, and his guards looked bored because they had heard this song. "I spared your father's life." Robb held the king's gaze and let the pause do work. "You did," he said, with such care that the words balanced like coins on his tongue. "The North will not forget that." "The North will do as it is told," Joffrey snapped, and then recovered his smile so quickly that the flicker behind it looked like something caught scurrying. "And it will be grateful. You will write again today. Tell them to wait. Tell them to pay their taxes. Tell them to send their daughters to court. I will see they are well married." His face brightened with his own generosity. "I will be a good king to those who are good to me." Robb thought of Cersei's hand on the boy's shoulder like a falconer's gauntlet. He thought of Tywin's letters folded like blades. He thought of Sansa's eyes in the candlelight. "I will write," he said. He meant it. He would write, and he would use words as a river uses stones, never to stop but to shape and wear and carry. He would write to the north and to the riverlands and to anyone who could read between the lines. He would use courtesy until it was a yoke, and then he would cut it. He would learn the Red Keep as he had learned Winterfell's towers as a boy with bare feet and a candle. What stair makes a noise, which floorboards complain, where the servants' doors let a body pass where great lords never go. He would wait. He would be a guest as a cat is a guest in a storeroom. He would eat and sleep and watch and measure. He would be ready. North, beneath a wall that made men small and honest, Eddard Stark walked beside his son along the top where the world fell away in both directions and the wind spoke in a voice like knives being whetted. The ice was blue underfoot, cracked and sealed and cracked again in a record of winters longer than any king's line. The sunrise spilled like thin beer along the horizon. The 2 of them stood in a place that belonged equally to no one and to everything. "Tell me," Jon said finally. It was a boy's request and a man's necessity. Eddard told him what he could. He told him of the spider's soft voice and the boy's hard one, of Sansa like porcelain that had learned not to break, of Robb in chains that were not chains, of the King's Road's long miles of hunger and ash. He did not speak Stannis's words. It was not yet time. He did not speak the name that beat at the deer-hide drum of his skull. He did not speak the sick, complicated truth that he had bartered one child's safety for another's, and that this was the sum of fatherhood, a ledger without end. Jon listened with his head lowered, like a man at a graveside. When Eddard was finished, they stood a moment in a silence that was not empty but full of the wind's teeth. "Then we work," Jon said. "Aye," Eddard said, and the word was a small warmth in the great cold. We work. They turned their faces to the business of the day, to drills and roofs and rations and the ordering of men who had learned to be angry at the wrong things and to fear what could not be seen. They moved with purpose because purpose was the shape of survival here, as in the South survival wore other shapes. Flattery, spite, calculation made into a sacrament. Behind walls, a boy king imagined conquers that had already happened and saw in mercy a weapon to be used again because he liked how light caught on it. A queen counted moves and set her pieces without hurry. A wolf in a tower learned how to make patience a blade. A mother far away stitched and unstitched with hands that would not be still, because movement was sometimes the only bulwark against despair. In the cold, two Starks stood high and learned how to speak to each other as men and as something else beyond blood and name, something knit from weather and duty and the simple fact of being alive in a world that wanted such things from them and more. The days moved one after another in a chain. Each link had its own weight. Ravens went out. Letters flew and landed where they would. At night, Eddard dreamed sometimes of the heart tree and sometimes of a river mouth where salt and fresh ward. Once he dreamt of a stag with golden antlers standing with its feet in snow while a lion watched from the shadows and neither moved, and then the snow began to melt and no one learned a lesson. There were signs of other things, too, beyond letters and politics and hostages with titles. Wildlings moved in bands that were not usual. Fires were seen at distances that did not draw near or fade. Old men muttered about trees walking and then denied it when asked. A ranger returned with frostbitten hands and a look in his eyes as if he had left something important behind in the dark and was afraid it might find its own way to him. He could not say what it was. Winter comes? Bowen Marsh said dourly, as if stating a thing could steel its teeth. Winter is already here, a man called Dywin replied cheerfully, because cheer was his weapon in the same way the next man's was his axe. Eddard learned the names here, too, because it felt necessary. He learned where the stairs on the east tower dipped in the third step and threw a man if he did not take them in memory rather than with eyes. He learned the sound Jon's breath made when he was thinking. He learned that Mormont liked to stand in the hall with his hand on the head of the bear's pelt as if it were a living thing he comforted or received comfort from. In the South, Robb learned how to make friends with servants, not with the grossness of men who threw them coins and called it intimacy, but with the attention of a man who knew that a word is a coin as well and can be exchanged for doors opening in odd places. He learned to touch the red keep when he walked, to place his hand on stone and stair and railing like a blind man mapping a room. He learned where he could lean and seem idle but see 3 corridors. He learned the rhythm of the guards' feet and how to time a cough to their passing so that it masked the sound of paper folding. He wrote to his mother again and again. He told her to stay away from the twins unless she had no choice. He told her if she had a choice to make one choice and not the halfway thing men do, that is neither. He did not write the name Walder Frey. He did not need to. He was the son of a woman who could read absence as easily as presence. He saw Joffrey in the yard once laughing while 2 dogs were made to fight. He stood very still and did not move until the moment ended. Later he found Sansa on a balcony with her hands clenched on the stone until the knuckles blanched. "Not every cruelty has an answer," he said softly. "But some do," she said, and the wind moved a curl over her forehead and set it to dancing so that for a moment she looked like a girl on a hill back home, laughing after a race. Some do. He dreamed again of gray wind. This time the wolf stood at a river's edge with the water pushed up like a lip and something on the far bank that was not a man and not a tree making a sound in its throat like hunger learned to speak. He woke and wrote the dream on a scrap of parchment and burned it, and when he watched it turn to black lace and then to nothing he felt oddly relieved, as if he had passed a secret to the fire and the fire had agreed to keep it. Days became the string on which future hung. Each was a bead with its own weight, its own color. They moved forward, as beads do, with the motion of the thing they are strung upon rather than their own will. The wall stood. The red keep glittered and rotted in the same breath. A king preened. A queen counted. A father worked. A son watched. The world sharpened around them. The snow came early, petulant and half-hearted, as if it were not sure of its welcome and wanted yet to announce itself. Eddard stood in the yard and held out his palm and watched the flakes die in his heat, and he thought of all the small deaths that make the world, and then he went back to the work because the work was how you honored both the deaths and the lives. In the rookery, a raven hopped with a new letter sealed in a pale blue wax that had seen dragon's fire once upon a time. Maester Aemon's old hands moved with the care of a man placing a crown. He sighed, and the sound was like the end of summer. He held the letter against the light as if he could see through wax what words would do once freed. His blind eyes turned toward Eddard, where the Lord stood, as if he had known all along he would be there. "From Dragonstone," Aemon said, and when he spoke the name, something in the room cooled. "From Stannis Baratheon." Eddard took the letter. He felt the weight of it, as one feels the weight of a fine blade. Not heavy, but present. He knew already what sort of words it would hold. They were not new words to him. They were only old words come at a different time, spoken with a different urgency. He broke the seal. The world did not end. It seldom does when men are certain it will. The world simply shifted. Pieces that had rested in place a long while moved, and some fell, and some sat briefly and then rolled to new edges, and some settled more firmly where they were, as if to say that they had always been intended to rest in that exact spot, though no one had thought so before. Eddard read. The lines were clean and hard. He had always disliked Stannis and respected him, which are cousins as close as any. He folded the letter once, and then again, until it was small in his hand, and small felt heavier. Jon watched his face. "We will need to speak," Eddard essay. "ID quietly," and the words went out of the rookery like a raven that could not be called back. In the south, under a sky of watered gold, Robb Stark sat with a small piece of bread in his hand and Sansa beside him, and a guard at the door, and a decision settling in him like a stone dropped into a deep well. It made no noise when it hit, but he felt the reverberation up his bones. "Patience," he said, and Sansa looked at him and nodded. And if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen that the nod had changed, that it had become a thing with its own will, not merely an answer to someone else's. "Yes," she said. "And when?" He smiled without humor. "When?" The city breathed. The north waited with the stolid ferocity that was its particular genius. The wall watched as it had always done. The ravens carried their small black burdens, and men went on being men. Brave and petty, cunning and foolish, kind in flashes like sun on ice, cruel with the conviction of righteousness. The road lay between, long and full of decisions. The gods, if they watched, did as the wall did. They endured, and once in a while they shifted the wind. And the ledger in Eddard Stark's heart turned its page. It would go on turning. That was what such ledgers did. He would enter what he must, ink dark and fine. He would cross no line that he could help. He would teach the boy beside him how to carry the book. He would not decide for him which debts a man should choose to owe. At dawn, he and Jon went to the yard again. The cold bit and blessed. "Again," Jon said, and Eddard lifted his sword. The world did not grow simpler. Seldom does. But there are, sometimes, things you can hold and lift and use in the space where all else is uncertain. A wooden sword, a son's regard, the discipline of a step taken right even in a wrong place, the taste of air that has come across ice and hears itself. "Again," he said. They moved. The day began. The story kept its counsel. It had not finished with any of them. It had only drawn its breath.